Today, we will talk about variables. What are variables? Variables are a placeholder to store data. The data could be a string, the data could be an integer, boolean, object. We are going to talk about this, but the point being, variables are placeholders for data. Let me give you an example. So imagine a spice rack. So a spice rack is something like this. So there is salt, there is sugar, there is cinnamon, and so on. Now, in your mind, you have pointers to different sections of the spice rack. For example, if you want to reach out for sugar, you know that it's going to be in the second portion of the rack. So essentially, your mind contains pointers to where each of the spice is in the spice rack. So a variable is also essentially a pointer. For example, when you say age equals 23, so the data 23 is stored somewhere in this large rack. So when I mean rack in the context of Python, it's also like a spice rack except that it's called as a heap. It's called a heap. This is where programming languages store data temporarily. Now, I'm not talking about storing files, databases. Those are specific types of storages used for a different purpose altogether. But when I say data that is stored temporarily, this is data that you use every so often in your program, like age equal to 23, age, and then you want to add one more year to the age. So make it 24. So this is a very temporary kind of a transaction. So all of this kind of data is stored in something called as a heap. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's called a heap or a stack. The point being, there is a place in memory, in your RAM, in your computer, where all of this data is being stored, and the variable just points to it. The variable itself does not hold the data. The variable points to a location where the data is stored. So what kind of data can a variable point at? It can point at a number. It can point at strings, booleans, objects. We'll talk about objects at a later point, but in this chapter, we'll talk about numbers, strings, and booleans. What is a number? A number is just a number, like age equal to 2 or 22 or 23. That's a number. So this is an example of a number. A string is like a sentence or a set of words. For example, when you say name is Ajay Tech, this is an example of a string. So let's create these variables in the Jupyter notebook. So name Ajay Tech and execute it. And you can see when you type in name, it contains the string Ajay Tech. A string can be enclosed either in a single quote or in a double quote. So this is okay or this is okay. Single quote or double quote. How about integers? Integers, you say age equals 21 and then shift enter to run that cell. Now what is age? Shift enter 21. This number could be as big as you want. But now here we have defined two variables, name and age, right? So if you say name, enter Ajay Tech, age, enter 21. How do you know that name contains a string and age contains a number? Python provides something called as a type function. So if you just use this function, type of age, Python will tell you whether this variable points to an integer or to a string. Shift enter or play, and then you can see that type of age is an integer. int for integer. How about type of name? Shift enter or play. This is a string. Now we haven't seen functions yet, But think of a function as a black box. A function is like a black box that does what it is supposed to. For example, so you said type of, within parentheses, you have given the variable name. So this was the variable name. And when you executed that, the result was it's an int or an integer. So this is an example of a function that we know will return the type of the variable name, whether it's an integer or a string or a float. We'll see more about functions later. We'll see how to define functions, how to create your own function, think about all the list of inbuilt functions that Python provides, so on and so forth. So for now, just understand that functions can do a certain task for you. And in this context, we are using the function type to understand what a particular variable points to.